right, I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Victoria Gordon. I'm the Chief of Staff here at the Athena Center for Leadership Studies at Barnard College. Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to have you all here for our final Power Talk of the semester featuring Athena Distinguished Fellow Jacki Zehner. In 1996,
it's like travel with fan club.
I'm going to give a brief background. In 1996, Jacki became the youngest woman and first female trader to be invited into the partnership of Goldman Sachs. In 2002, she became a founding partner of Circle Financial Group, a private wealth management organization consisting of a small number of women committed to managing their family's assets and philanthropic undertakings. In 2012, Jacki became Chief Engagement Officer and President of Women Moving Millions, a nonprofit organization with the bold mission of mobilizing unprecedented resources for the advancement of women and girls. And today, Jacki serves as the president of the Jacqueline and Gregory Zehner Foundation, working with a variety of organizations and initiatives that have a particular focus on women's rights, women's foundations, movement building, and media. So we're delighted to have you with us. And I'm also delighted, round of applause. We also have the wonderful Marie Wilson joining us here as the moderator for this conversation with Jacki. Marie is also a distinguished fellow with the center here. How do I even go into introducing you except to say she's the founder and president emerita of both the White House Project and the Ms. Foundation for Women. She's a co-creator of Take Our Daughters and Sons to Work Day, and author of several books. She's a leading feminist leader and a social entrepreneur, so thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to the both of you.
Wow. I just want to thank everyone. I know it's a busy time of year, and especially students. How many students are in the room tonight? Oh, thank you for being here. How many faculty? One. How many people that heard about this from some random way? Okay, we're going to talk later. So interesting. I know my accountant's friend is here. And I just want to do a special shout out to my friends, a couple from Connecticut that came here tonight. Linda Bash, who had the honor of serving, Linda was the head of the National Council for Research on Women for many years. Some peeps in the back, my Goldman Sachs former colleagues, including one, Beth Polish, that I haven't seen in 10 years, 12, 10, 9. And Terry and my best male friend over here, James. So thanks to everyone who came out tonight. I'm really touched. Thank you.
No, but I'm going to start by asking her to tell us a little bit about some of her other lives and life. But what we know at this point in time is that she is someone that is moving women across the world. She's well known for it. She's well written about for it. And we're very fortunate that she's here tonight. If it's good, if it's happening, if it's around anything worthwhile, she's in it. That's what I would say. Because if I have to tell you everything she does, I'm really leaving. All right? All right.
That's very sweet.
Okay. No, it was really true. How we came to this in terms of knowing each other was interesting, and I want her to go into some other stuff, but I like the idea that we came to it through, I think, the White House Project, or was it before that?
That's a good question. Sometimes I think back, like, when's that moment, or who are those people?
Yeah,
and certainly
yeah.
Marie was one of them. Linda, who's here,
Right.
was one of them. But I think, it's this passion around women's leadership, and I think we
Right.
heard of, I certainly heard of you. I was at the baby stages of my engagement around women's inclusion and leadership post-finance career. So I think, obviously I knew of your work as Take Your Daughters to Work Day, and it's actually interesting because that was a transformational, I didn't even make that connection until I sat down here, but I think one of the things that really changed the trajectory of my life was giving a speech on Take Your Daughters to Work Day to about 400 girls, now that I think about it.
We can go home now.
Yeah.
I feel better.
No,
that's
it
wonderful.
really was.
That's really wonderful. I'm
remember
glad to have
that.
had any part in your life and career.
Oh, well, you have. More than that, but I think
No,
that
that's
I
right.
think about that connection because I was researching the founding. Remember that? I don't think they have it anymore. It's Take Your Daughters and Sons to Work.
They do it.
Isn't it?
They do daughters, they do sons,
Yeah.
they do everything. But it made its point. And Melissa Silverstein, who's in the room, was actually a part of that as well, who's also a part of this work with film and is leading it here at Barnard. You know, I want Jacki, who has done a lot of interesting things, to review some of those for us. And the first thing, of course, is that Jacki, how do I say this?
I don't know. I'm nervous, though.
Jacki was on Wall Street.
Yes.
I mean, I have to get those words out. Jacki was on Wall Street, and she was amazing. She was the first woman to be on the trading floor, on the trading side.
No, not the first one trader, but the first one to make partner.
Well,
as
the
a
first
trader.
one to make partner. I'd like you to talk some about that, because that was a really historical thing.
Yeah, you know, yes, it was, and it's such an honor to have some of my Goldman Sachs colleagues here back in the day. But yeah, you know, it's interesting now because what's causing me to think a lot about my Wall Street career in this moment. Actually, I just wrote a post today on LinkedIn called, it was a series that LinkedIn, they do, and they put out different subject matters every month. And this one, I was the first ... So my story was I was the first woman trader to be made partner of Goldman Sachs, and then I sort of retraced my history. And and I tell that story all the time, but what's making it uniquely of the moment is that my boss, direct manager for most of my career, is the nomination for the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Steven Mnuchin. So it's really interesting to think about, and I have to say I've had a moment of like, that could it have been me question. And, you know, I think and not in the sense...
Could I just interrupt you?
Sure.
Would that it could have been you.
Well, I guess it could have been, sure. I made different choices along the way, but it just was when someone that you know so well is up for such a big position and such a controversial moment, perhaps, you know, and you just think about that because I purposefully, you know, took myself out of that career on Wall Street in 2002, well after I made partner, but now I think of, you know, where do different choices take you? So the piece was sort of a piece about choices matched with opportunity. But, you know, I grew up in a small town in Canada, I'm 52, so I was born in 64 and ended up on Wall Street in 88, you know, out of a school, I went to school in British Columbia, University of British Columbia, and was recruited for this career in finance. And I knew I was studying finance, so I knew I wanted a career, but at the time it was just so different, you know, in terms of what you had exposure to and in terms of what you imagined or didn't imagine a career to be like. I mean, I had no idea what it meant to be a Wall Street trader. I started as an analyst like most people do, and then ended up staying, you know, and actually having a pretty fast trajectory to partner. I started in 88 as an analyst. I didn't go back to business school, so I got promoted to a trader in 90 and made partner in 1996, which is pretty quick. But, you know, in hindsight, there was the great, the good, the not so good, the bad, and the totally ugly. And I think that's probably true for everyone's career. And thankfully, you think of when you measure not just happiness, but choices, you kind of say, well, how much time am I spending in each of those buckets? And I spent the vast majority of my career in the pretty awesome bucket. And I love the markets, I still do. I still find them absolutely interesting and challenging to think about, and still spend a lot of time more in a personal capacity thinking about investment decisions. But also now sort of, for example, this morning I attended this conference. I didn't forget the question. I'm just going to get back there. But I went to this conference that the FT Live was hosting on impact investing. So it was this pretty high level. Gillian Tett, the managing editor of the FT, was hosting it, like really big name impact investors, you know, in the space. And, you know, what was so cool is, you know, I have this history now in women's research and women's rights and philanthropy and finance. And I brought this perspective, I think, and now storytelling. And there was actually a really big conversation about storytelling and finance, like who knew? And, you know, and then because I did all of that, I'm showing up in the world of finance in a way that I couldn't have, frankly, and Steven Mnuchin can't. And I just I sat there and I think, well, that's interesting. to know how your experience. But I love my career. I was very fortunate. Did I have some not so great experiences? Absolutely. But was it a, amazing career for me in terms of realizing my own capacity and potential and leadership? And that's maybe another conversation. Yes, it was awesome.
Well, actually, you have had several careers. I mean, you said you loved your career. I think you loved what you did with the banking career, but you are on a whole different career. Oh, I'm talking to you too. Who are you? You are on a whole different career trajectory. But what kind of pushed you out? I mean, they didn't push you out, I know. Why did you leave?
Yeah, oh gosh, this is being taped, right? It's so tough. It's tough for me to go there because I think what you think at the time is different what you might think 16 years later.
Right.
What I think I thought at the time was I had gone on from a career in finance and, on the trading desk, and had really gotten involved with women's leadership programs. That's how I came to know Linda. Actually, a very transformational thing. I had the pleasure of having a 2.5-hour lunch with Gloria Steinem this afternoon. I know, it's so incredible. And I was sharing with her, because we were asked to share the first time we met Gloria, because we're doing some work around a new foundation for her. And the first time I met her was received an honor from the National Council for Research on Women in 1999 when I was pregnant with my daughter, my second child, and Gloria was there. And I have a picture with her, and I'm like, oh my God, like, how did that happen in my life? And it's for work around women's diversity and leadership. I mean, awards, thank you, and I don't know if it was such a privilege. But anyways, I got this award, and it was really, very, very transformational, for me at the time. But my passion became women's inclusion and leadership and diversity at Goldman. I took on a role in the executive office, and I think, when I made that transition and was doing that job, I loved it. I love human capital management. I love the idea of because I was such a passionate culture carrier of the firm, how to truly have that literal seat in the executive office where you, theoretically at least, had influence around policy and practice. And yet, at times, what I witnessed was not consistent with my own values around that. And then it became just really difficult work, really difficult. And I think at the time, I both, on the one hand, Beth knows my champion at Goldman Sachs passed away very suddenly, this man named Mike Mortera, who was very significant to Beth's career as well, just died very suddenly of a brain aneurysm. So I lost my champion. When that happens, that's very significant emotionally and otherwise. And then, I was doing commute to New Canaan. I had 2 kids. My husband had left to be home with the kids. So I was doing that whole mom thing where you'd get home and then you hear there's a bake sale and then you don't have cookies. And then you're I remember, I probably shared this with you, Peg. I remember sitting, I have a poem about it. I have it on my computer. I might just have to read it later. I literally was so sick, and I got home, and my husband left a note, where are the cookies? Question mark. The store's closed. I live in New Canaan. Are you kidding me? I'm dying trying to make the stupid cookies. And then I'm in my kitchen, and I see a mouse in the kitchen, and I hate mice. And I literally crawled on top of my desk, the kitchen island, and just sat there crying. I couldn't stop crying. And I'm the firm had gone public at the time. I wasn't loving my job. I had 2 little kids. I didn't have cookies. And I'm it was just I couldn't take it anymore. I was up at 5 in the morning. Nothing was really working. Right. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know, no one really helped me. And I don't mean that in a critical way, but no one else was doing it. There was no what I have now and everything, that's a whole nother story. But I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't fight in the way that I wanted to fight. I didn't feel like I had the tools. And actually it was a whole nother story about what was the moment. It would involve Gloria Steinem again. But I decided it was just time. It was just all too hard for not enough impact.
Wow.
I didn't haven't told that story before.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
No,
that way.
um,
Cookies, fucking cookies.
how many
And I don't
women,
eat cookies that much to this
how many women
day.
and men in this room have had a cookie moment? Oh, come on. Come on, yeah.
One of the damn
No,
cookies.
but they, yeah.
And they know when it's homemade. They know. Those moms, they friggin' know. And they look at you. They're like, "Oh, those came from the store."
Their loss, their loss was our gain, as many of us know. I think there were probably cookies on our side. But what happened, of course, and I don't know exactly how it happened, but you got involved in the whole area of the women's funding movement and the women's movement, and you had a family, or have, I think, a family foundation that you're part of. You got involved with women and still in finance. You had a career, or you had the circle that you, what was the name of that?
Circle Financial Group.
Yeah, and you had your Circle Financial Group. So you kind of had your next step, but you actually, I'm interested in what made you go toward philanthropy. I mean, because that's where you ended up, that's where you started to go, to the women's movement, but to the philanthropic part of the women's movement. The part where you raise money, how many of you want to do that? Okay, no, sorry. No, you really went to the philanthropic part. What was that called?
Well, I think it's interesting because I feel like once you're off the corporate track, and I don't know if this is true today, but I knew, it seemed natural. Like I realized about myself, I'm not a worker. So I'm either going to work for money or work for no money, but either way I'm going to work. Because my kids are like, you work so hard for no money. Like, and then you give money. Like, why? Yeah, clearly I've done a good parenting job with that one. But no, it's interesting because you think, I knew a lot what I cared about. I just knew that activating it in the context of a full-time job wasn't working for me. So I joined Circle Financial Group, which is just a home base. And we had, obviously, the firm had gone public, so my husband was a partner too, so we did have a wealth event, and we're, having to learn how to manage that, because neither one of us came from wealth, and we didn't spend a lot of time on our own investing prior to leaving. It was like Goldman Sachs stock and cash, and not even real estate. We didn't even own a house, so... it was that whole journey to really understand how to be good fiduciaries of financial assets and the size that we had. So I was interested on that side of it. But on the other side, I knew that my passion really was women's leadership and inclusion. And particularly, and Linda and I did a project to this day, which I could not, and I'm back in touch with Carrie McCabe, by the way. So, but I knew what I was super interested in still was why I got obsessed with this question at Goldman, and then when I left, even more so in some ways, where were the women? Why were there so few women in senior leadership positions in financial institutions? Like, why? And I studied that from an internal perspective, but it's a question I sort of carried with me, and I was on the board, so I started giving to nonprofit organizations. I'm very interested in movement building. I'm very interested in networks because I think at the core of what we are human beings wanting to be connected with human beings and ones that share our values. So it's always been super important to me. So the idea of being part of networks, which the women's funding movement is, anchored, in a philosophy of sort of more democratic philanthropy and women coming together to support and champion other women, seeing the solutions as grassroots solutions, not that we're coming with all the answers, but we're coming with whatever we can bring to the table, in partnership with those that, we're trying to support and work with. So that was all super appealing. So I was on that journey of giving, serving on boards, and doing all of that. When Linda, we had this idea of we need to do something about this question because no one seemed to be answering it. So we went upon, it took a long time to write this paper in 2009 called Women in Fund Management, A Roadmap to Critical Mass and Why It Matters. And we looked at all the research at the time that tried to answer the question why so few women in financial services and specifically in fund management or decision-making roles around capital. And it was a really thoughtful paper that to this day I'm so proud of in terms of it sort of framing the problems, framing the research, and putting up with a list of solutions. So in that context, I hired someone finally for our foundation, Nina, And we worked very closely together, and we started traveling. We traveled to the world, well, a lot of places, not the world, but we went to Deauville to present the paper. And in the context of working that paper, I really sort of got ignited by this idea of, like, I don't have to just be a passive giver and serve on boards. There's work to be done to be a bridge builder between a lot of spaces where people don't usually travel between. And then that sort of all took on a life of its own.
I think you got, I'm trying to think about when we met. I mean, we were asked in this paper to look at when we met. What I remember about you is that, and you don't remember when we met, but I do because I can see you. No, it's very interesting. I had just been to a workshop in Austria or something, and it was the time when I thought about doing the White House project for a woman president, you know. And I was really leery about it. And so I stood up in this group and I said, you know, I'm Marie Wilson, I'm from the United States, and I want to share this idea I've had. I thought that we actually should be working toward a woman president. And I was, and everybody was like, oh, and I was like, oh, okay, that's because you're not in our country, but okay. And yes.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Yeah. So, but what was, and it was very interesting because a woman. Oh.
What does it take for me to do this?
Thank you for all your help. So what was really funny at that event was that a woman stood up who was from Africa, and she had on all this beautiful garb, and she picked up a broom, and she said, "Don't worry, sister. When things get messy, we always get to clean up." And that might be a good thing for now, by the way, to remember. But I came back, and I was at a meeting where you were at. And for some reason, you started talking. I think it was a corporate meeting, but for some reason, you started talking about a woman president.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me? Okay.
Yes.
Will you? Okay.
No, go on.
Okay. This is a really long story.
Uh-oh.
No, buckle down. No, and I think it's a good context that we're going to show a clip. James has heard the story. He's like, yeah, just don't be thinking you're going anywhere because this is going to take until 11. No, so.
I had no idea.
Well, and I'm not going to tell the long story. I'm just
teasing.
going to tease it out a little bit. It's sort of written. It's called, and it's on my website if you want to look at it. It's called Why No Wonder Woman. And it's a 70-page report that's on my website that in the front of it anchors this story. So, and it sounds crazy. But I had this when I was deciding whether or not to leave Goldman Sachs, and I had to prepare a speech. This is like crazy full circle stuff happening. I had to write a speech for Take Your Daughters to Work Day, and I was looking for a little bit of a hook or something. And I was, as a child, obsessed with Wonder Woman, the character. I loved Linda Carter. I loved kind of the whole idea of having superpowers. And I had just recently written something around for Fast Company magazine around a leadership principle called Be a Superhero. And it was this idea that we all had these unbelievable capacities, and if we could show up with them, and if it wasn't about us or ego, but just doing the right thing. And it was on the back of this Tom Peters, if you remember that Leadership Guru article.
I do.
So anyways, I had this leadership principle up, and I started just really pondering, why was there not a Wonder Woman movie? You're probably going, where is this going? I know you are, but I'm going to land it. But it was like I started obsessing about the character, because we had Batman, we had Superman, we had no female superheroes. We still don't, by the way, but she's finally coming out in 2017. So I was traveling back and forth to New Canaan, Connecticut, and I literally had an idea for Wonder Woman screenplay. So this idea of a female superhero screenplay. And it involved a woman becoming president of the United States. And the bit of a narrative of it, which is, so I told this to someone the other day, they're like, you have to do that. So I'm gonna play it out with you, and then you can say, you have to do that. But it was the idea that when the world was created, however you think why, that one was this sort of an exercise, they're both exercises in free will, but one, the forces of patriarchy took over, one, matriarchy. And my character in this world, there were two worlds, and this one was going to hell in the handbasket because, and I literally have this in notebooks, because someone came to power that was literally going to blow up the world. And so this world sent this, this world sent, this was in 2000. This world sent over a character who was our Wonder Woman person to help. You didn't know the narrative at the time, except that it was a backdrop of a really nasty political election in which a woman who was, I'm not kidding, I swear, and I put my hand on a Bible about this. The woman was destined to become president of the United States. Perfect pedigree, perfect everything, nothing wrong about her. And out of nowhere, this candidate comes up and undermines. I'm not kidding. You're looking at me. Would I lie? I would never lie. Like, I'm not a liar about stuff like this that goes on the record. Maybe white lies about where I am or if I have time to look at your business plan. I might lie over that. But so in this narrative, this woman was going to become president, and this guy derails her. So this character, Wonder Woman, comes in, and this whole, you don't know what's going on until sort of the end, where she ends up helping her become president and derailing this guy. But what you don't know in the story is that it's actually her sister. So this character was sent to be born in the United States so she could do everything perfectly without, because they knew that's what it would take for women to become president. She would have to be friggin' perfect. Perfect. And then she got derailed, right? I have chills. I know I have to do that. But you know what's really effed up is look what year it is and look what just happened. And there's more to the story. But it was this idea. I had this screenplay, and I'm like, I'm going to quit and work on the screenplay because I think it's a really good idea. So I quit and started to work on the screenplay and took a film course. And I quit the day I was giving a speech with 85 broads. After you were there, you remember. And it was because the night before I had dinner, so I was going to quit, and I went to dinner with my friend Ann Kaplan, who was on the board of Smith College. And I was like, Ann, I'm going to quit. I have this idea for a screenplay, and I'm just tired, and I'm exhausted, and there was the cookie thing. And she's like, just calm down. Calm down, Jacki. She's come to dinner. I said, okay, but she's my mentor, and I'm like, I really need to talk to you about this. And she said, well, fine, but we'll talk after dinner. And I said, okay, well, who are you having for dinner? And she's like, well, Gloria Steinem and her new husband, David Bale, who's he passed away, Christian Bale's, who was Batman, father, and Annalisa knows him. Oh my gosh, it's like spooky connections. So we had dinner, and so I'm having dinner, and I'm like, David Bale, Gloria's husband, was like saying, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm at Goldman Sachs, but I'm going to like quit and write the Wonder Woman screenplay. And he said, well, that's interesting, because Gloria Steinem is one of the world's experts on Wonder Woman. And I'm like, that's a sign. And so I talked about Wonder Woman with her the whole night, and then I went and gave a speech and quit.
It was a great speech.
So that the anchor of the story was about 2000, actually it was 2001, about a woman becoming president of the United States and how that would change the world. How it would change the world. Because we would suddenly, and it'll be a good cue to this film, once that happens, we will change how we see women's leadership forever in this country. And the good news is that it is being done in other countries. Can we stop and show a clip?
Sure.
Sure, okay. So this is a film called 50/50, and I'm just going to set it up. So I'm on the board of the Sundance Institute and do a lot in film. And I met this amazing filmmaker named Tiffany Schlain, who's really cool. She founded the Webby Awards. She founded Character Day. She's like sort of at that intersection of technology and film. That's her. So she calls me up one day. She says, Jacki, I want to do a short film on the history of women. And I'm like, awesome. She's like, 17 minutes. I'm like, wow, how are you going to do that? And she goes, well, I'm like, where did this come from? And she said, well, I met this amazing woman named Laura Liswood. I mean, like, and then I said, Laura, I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, she runs this organization called Women World Leaders. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, do you know that how many women world leaders do you think there are? And I said the answer. And she goes, no one knows that. And I knew that, and I didn't know that, and I want to make a film around it. And I said, well, Laura Liswood, we hired to be the first chief diversity officer at Goldman Sachs, actually. And when you see the opening of the film, you'll know why. So it's a 17-minute film. How long if you want to watch all 17 minutes, I'm totally game. Do you want to do it? Okay, let's do it. No, it's fine. I think everyone heard.
I thought so. Yeah. But at any rate, this is a very important thing that Jacki was instrumental in finding or in starting, and it's become very powerful around the world. it's groups of hundreds of now women's organizations, women's funding organizations, who are women putting their $1 million into a one pot, and everybody gives $1 million. And it's really then having enough cash, enough power, enough of that kind of power to move. And I think it transformed your life in some way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, gosh, so I heard about this idea of this campaign. It started in 2007, and I have two of my colleagues, Amanda and Ondine, here from our WM team, who I love so much. It's crazy. That it started as a campaign. So when I heard about it, it was two women founders, Helen Kelly Hunt and Swanee Hunt, who were, Helen in particular, what I would say feminist philanthropists. They helped to start a number of women's organizations. I think Helen has founded or co-founded 14 of them, including Dallas Women's Foundation, New York Women's Foundation, Women's Funding Network. And Helen's passion, they hail from the Hunt oil family, and Helen and Swanee tell stories about remember Dallas? I know if we're old enough, I see some nodding, was modeled after their family. Yeah, and they tell this very openly. Yeah, I know, yes. Anyways, it's true. And so but Helen in particular, they found out how much they were worth because they read about it in Forbes magazine. Not because, and when Helen tells the story, she went to get married, they brought her to-be fiancé into a room where they discussed her financial situation with him and not her there. So she was very financially disempowered, as she would share very openly, and got very involved with philanthropy and very much believed in a democratic approach, which women's funds represent. So she tells this great story with her sister Swanee about the spark that encouraged them to start Women Moving Millions. When she was studying women donors, she was saying women were starting to make $1 million gifts, but we're making it anonymously, which women tend to do, or doing it to organizations that, in her words, were patriarchal, that supported and created problems, in fact, that women's funds were trying to solve. So they had this idea of $1 million campaign where they would go to women they knew in partnership with an organization and ask for $1 million gift. And at the time, and it sort of so plays into this narrative of abundance versus scarcity, and to this day, I think women's organizations tend to try to do so much with so little and don't ask for what they often need. And so the idea was to spark big giving. They set a goal of $150 million. They catalyzed, I wouldn't say raised, because it didn't go into a fund. Every woman could give to whatever she wanted to give to, but you'd have to literally sign a pledge form that says where your $1 million was going, and it was to women's funds or foundations. So I heard about this, and it could be over a maximum of 10 years to one or many organizations, and I think even bequests at the time. Amanda is our policewoman of pledge forms, so she knows all over there. But so I heard about this initiative, and I was giving pretty big at the time, but I was kind of doing it 1 year at a time, and actually NCRO was one of my biggest at the time, and I was still shaken when I was writing some of those bigger checks, and I realized I had the capacity, in partnership with my husband, of course, to make $1 million commitment. So that, for me, the idea that I could say where $1 million was going and sign my name to it, to me it was, of course, financial commitment, but it was, and I love this line, my daughter's a Katy Perry fan, this idea, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. And it was, when I wrote it down and named those organizations, I really realized what I stood for. I named my purpose in life, frankly. This will be my life's work until, we have 50-50, and then I will rest. But this idea, this is what I really cared about. And that's the power of a campaign. We're thinking about doing a campaign in honor of our 10th anniversary this year. It might be Women Moving Millions. We've been incubating the idea of a multi-billion-dollar campaign for women and girls. And I just sort of invite you to think about, how you feel when you give, whatever level it is. When you write that check, it says something about who you are and what you care about. But it also says a lot about, even more now that we have the tools, who we are and what we care about is who we hire for a financial advisor, what kind of car we buy, whether we're going to go into that store versus that one, what we do on crowdfunding. So increasingly, this idea of your financial resources as being a tool to express your values in investing, impact investing in Genderlands, and purchasing power, and in philanthropy is now the work that we're doing in the world. So that was transformational for me. So when I got involved and wrote that check, I became part of this inaugural group. And just to tell you another worlds coming to crazy together story in this moment, last night we had an event at the new women's building, which is the Women's Correctional Institute. How many have been to an event there? So this is this amazing facility. I don't know how long it's open until now. It's on West 20th Street, and it was a women's prison, which I didn't know there was one, in Manhattan. Apparently the worst prison in the country around sexual abuse of inmates. And it was after Hurricane Sandy, they closed the prison. And the Novo Foundation and maybe others are stepping in and turning it into the women's building. And we had an event there last night with the Annie Leibovitz exhibit, Women. And we had a talking circle with the head of the Third Wave Fund, myself, the head of the Malala Fund, and Agnes Gund, who's a major arts philanthropist. And it was like 100 people in the room. And it was on the backdrop of all these photos. And the reason it was so meaningful for me is that the moment was, in 2009, was memorialized in an event where Annie Leibovitz took all our photos, the women donors of the campaign, and it stretches about 6 feet long. And it was this idea of the historicity of women coming together to make large and big and bold commitments to women. And then I got hooked, and then I just got super involved and helped catalyze us from this campaign to what we say is now a community 6 years later, 7 years later. We now have 262 members in 14 countries, each of which have designated a gift of $1 million or more to women-led causes. And we just this week received a check for $500,000 from the Gates Foundation to partner for the first ever philanthropic women's leadership curriculum in the world. So we're pretty exciting. It's been a good friggin' week. It's been a good week, yes.
No, it's a great story. I mean, I love the story of Helen and Swanee because all of us who work in this field know Helen and Swanee. And I still remember the day that Helen called me up. She said, hello. I mean, they actually got a little, they got up with their money, like, hi, Marie, hi, Helen. I know you have $1 million donors that you raised at the Ms. Foundation for Women. I want all their names. I said, really? And she said, yeah, start now. So I gave her the names.
She was pretty bossy.
She is. They may have had a hard time, those girls, but they grew up tough. But at any rate, that's a great story. And it's an amazing thing that we are having at least some money that is possibly money that can make change, and that women are doing it together. And I'm glad that's become a real passion for you. I think we had one more question here, but I think we ought to just open it up because it's been, we didn't know we were going to do this long movie, but it was a very moving movie anyway, and a very positive movie. Every time I see, and I've been studying for years because of the White House Project, how few women we have in leadership, particularly as, looking around the world, not just at the top, but all the way up and down. We're so small, and so I thought I would look for a statistic where the United States was ahead in anything one day. I got so mad. And I found out that we are actually #1 in wine consumption and breast augmentation. In the world. So I think yes. And I couldn't help myself because I was thinking so much about this and thinking, oh no. But there is hope. And the last thing I want to say is because we've seen a film that some of us have really taken to film with the help of Melissa Silverstein, who I think had to leave. She didn't feel well. But I think the other thing that Jacki has been doing for years and has talked some about, but is really moving things in the world, is people seeing film and documentary, because they're seeing stories that move people around issues that have never been moved. And I don't know how many of you have seen The Loving Story yet? It was first a documentary that was made by a friend of ours at Full Frame Film Festival. And now it's a beautiful film that I forgot you got a lot more money for films than documentaries. And they used Nancy Bursky's work, but they made a gorgeous film about the first interracial marriage that finally went to the Supreme Court and opened that field up. Because part of what we haven't talked as much about tonight is when you look at these women's funds and what's happened, one of the beauties of this movement is that the people who are funded are truly diverse. And it's probably the only funding mechanism in America where the money goes into diverse communities and goes into people who represent all of America. And that is something that women have brought often. As a matter of fact, I called Shirley Chisholm first when I started the White House Project. And I said, would you just be our honorary chair? Because she ran a wonderful campaign for president that very few people know about. And she said, oh, I would do that. And I said, could you tell me what was the hardest for you when you did that? And she said, men. It was wonderful, but we toured a film about Chisholm all over the country and trained 15,000 women at the White House Project, but we took that film everywhere to show what a real leader looks like. And that's our story, and we're sticking to it, me and Jackie.